Happy May Day, everybody, and welcome back to Blumira Briefings, your weekly download of the top headlines and trends for your security practice. This week, ConnectWise handing out the master key while Microsoft holds the door, an LLM secure proxy that turned out to be more proxy than secure, ShinyHunters slipping in through the analytics back door, and a new POC may have you fighting with your own clipboard. That's right, baby. We're doing 4 today, so pitter-patter, let's get at her. First up, CISA added 2 new entries to the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog, and they go together like fine wine and a war crime. Attackers are taking something old-ish and something new to chain a killer combo. CVE 2024-1708, which is an auth bypass in ConnectWise Screen Connect, and CVE 2026-32202, a Windows shell spoofing flaw. What happens is they bypass the RMM, ride the shell bug in, land admin on every endpoint that tool touches after. For MSPs that are running Screen Connect, this could affect downstream customers, all of them simultaneously. And honestly, we are way past the point when remote management tools should still be shipping with exploitable defaults. So Ian, what's the immediate action plan that teams should run today, and how should they go about it?
So ConnectWise is back in the news again for one of their CVEs being added to the KVE, or the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities list under the CISA. This is a list that they maintain throughout the year, and they update it pretty regularly with vulnerabilities that have been seen to be exploited in the wild. This CVE was released back in 2024, so not a new one, but it did carry a score of 10. It was pretty scary back then. It was tied to authentication bypass as well as path traversal. So people scrambled pretty heavily to get this kind of covered and patched. ConnectWise released an update pretty shortly thereafter the CVE was announced, just so people would be covered. However, obviously we're in 2026 and this CVE was just added to that list, showing that it's been exploited. So clearly there are ConnectWise instances that are still running this outdated version and are still being exploited. Since 2023, there have been about 10 CVEs released for under ConnectWise Screen Connect. But again, this one, 2024, isn't new, still being exploited, still being targeted. Blumira does have detections that will alert if these are happening or trying to be exploited as well. But whether it's Screen Connect, AnyDesk, WebEx, any screen sharing software, these should be heavily monitored and they should be restricted in the environment if they're not used, especially on company-owned hardware. A little bit more difficult if we're talking about personal hardware and people are logging into those systems with organizational credentials and using systems there. Hopefully, any kind of screen sharing software would be limited to only company-owned assets, and then again, restricted if it's not used or not needed in any capacity, just to kind of close that risk and make sure things aren't getting out. They should be getting out. As well as updating Screen Connect, ConnectWise, any other software that you're using. As always, please update, patch, whether it's a CVE that's scored a 10 or anything lower, patch as often as you can.
Next up, the universal law still holds true. Every shiny new AI tool comes with an equally and opposite shiny new attack surface. An SQL injection bug has surfaced in the LiteLLM proxy server, which is a common tool that teams are using to route requests, manage API keys, and track usage across their LLM providers. An unauthenticated attacker can run arbitrary database commands, and that can net them API keys, user credentials, as well as the routing rules that decide where prompts go. There's a working proof of concept, no active exploitation in the wild yet, but the gap between POC and mass scanning now is usually measured in days at best. So, Jake, for teams who put LiteLLM in front of their stack to centralize control, what's the right way to mitigate this risk?
So the LiteLLM thing, it's an open source project that is, they sell it as an AI gateway, so you can kind of have one-stop shop for all of your MCP tools and all of these different AI LLM vendors like Claude and Azure and all of that all in one spot, trying to make it easier. The best analogy I can think of is kind of like how password managers, you put one password and it protects a whole bunch of them. Kind of the same idea. It's like you try to secure that one initial access with a really good password, some MFA, and then inside of that you've got all sorts of different passwords. It's kind of like the same idea. It's a vault that's containing access to all these different AI tools. So the thing about putting all of your tools in one spot, even if we can make that exterior super hard to crack, it makes it enticing for attackers, even if it does take them a lot of time and effort to either develop bespoke tools or do some like vuln research to find their way into these. Because a lot of times if they can get into them, usually it's worth their effort, and it's worth like spending all that time to get into them. So we've seen this time and again, especially with LiteLLM. We just had one last month where LiteLLM was compromised via a supply chain compromise, where we also saw in there harvesting credentials from downstream environments happened as well. So this isn't the first time this has happened. It probably won't be the last, just because getting into these things is super rewarding for attackers. And also being open source gives the attackers lay of the land already, so they don't need to go guessing, wondering where these credentials are. They can see the code. They know what, like, the back of their hands before they even compromise the system, so they can get in and get out exactly what they need pretty quickly. So what are some things you can do to protect yourself? First things first is to get your patching done. There's a patch available. You want to patch to 1.83.7 or later immediately. This closes that SQL injection code path entirely, and the vulnerable query is now parameterized. So that takes care of the whole exploit altogether. Second, there is a workaround if you can't get patching done immediately. You have to set disable error logs true in general settings. This removes the error handling path that lets unauthenticated input reach the vulnerable query. So that's one thing you can do to just kind of, if you can't patch immediately, you want to put in the workaround until you got time in the weekend or during some downtime. That's your best bet. Next thing, just to go over some like general security tips. Even if you already have the patch, or if you already have done the workaround, some things to keep in mind. Never expose your AI gateway directly to the internet. Try to put it behind a reverse proxy with authentication if you can. The CVE is pre-auth, so anything that can reach the port 4000 can exploit it. So a reverse proxy adds a gateway before traffic ever touches LiteLLM, so you've got that little bit of extra coverage. Apply principle of least privilege, so don't let everybody have access to this AI gateway. The least amount of people that have access to it, the more you can start to narrow down the scope and narrow down your attack surface, and just kind of keep tabs on all the people accessing things. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Always a good reminder of principle least privilege. Set per user budget caps and rate limits. This is in the case that somebody is able to get credentials or API keys or something like that. If they're able to run away with them, they can't just kind of use them and rack up big bills and big charges towards you. And the rate limiting as well helps slow them down sometimes if they're kind of going crazy with queries trying to find data. That might ultimately not stop them from getting their stuff, but it could slow them down, giving you more time to react. Some other things to keep in mind is API key expiration and rotation. Your keys shouldn't live forever, so automatic expiration means even a stolen key has a shelf life. So just kind of put in those general expirations and rotations as best practices. Make sure you've got audit logging and request tracking enabled. This is how we initially saw this attack happen and how we're able to track it. So make sure that it's enabled and you know how to use it. If you don't know how to use it, or just like if you're curious, run a test, see if you can like find what you're looking for, or see if you can like take an action that is suspicious and see if you can find it in the logs, and make sure you can look it up so you know how that it's logging correctly and you know how to look through those logs. And lastly, if you had a vulnerable version, and depending on your risk evaluation, this is probably going to be different for everybody. You might want to consider rotating every key stored in any instance that was internet reachable while that vulnerability was like open on a particular server. So that's going to be different for everybody. You're going to have to make your own decision if that's something you want to do. But if you only have a couple keys in there and if it's relatively low effort, I would say go ahead and do it. It's better be safe than sorry. And those are some things you can keep in mind when you're working with this LiteLLM AI gateway and any other AI gateway in the future. I'm sure there's going to be more projects just like this if there aren't already, and they're going to be open to the same kind of abuse from attackers.
And speaking of single points of failure, ShinyHunters claimed a Vimeo breach this week, and then Vimeo clarified respectfully that the real compromise happened at Anodot, their third-party analytics provider. Attackers apparently never touched Vimeo's perimeter directly. They instead got in through a vendor with an already authenticated pipe to Vimeo's corporate data, then grabbed what they wanted and listed it for sale. Anodot serves a lot of enterprise customers, so Vimeo is almost certainly not the only one who's been exposed here. Mike, what's the realistic playbook for third-party risk when the vendor's security posture is accidentally writing checks that your organization has to cash?
All right, so ShinyHunters. It's been reported that Vimeo was breached by ShinyHunters. This one's kind of, it's ShinyHunters being ShinyHunters. They went after another company. Actually, Vimeo wasn't even the initial target. They came in through another company called Anodot, which is like an AI analytics platform. They stole customer keys from Anodot. Vimeo ended up being a customer, pivoted into their BigQuery, Snowflake, basically exported a bunch of data. According to Vimeo, they got video titles, metadata, basically emails, user stuff, not necessarily content, it sounds like. Credit to Vimeo, they did the right thing. They moved very quickly on this, pulled credentials once they knew, and responded accordingly. This one's interesting. We'll see whether they pay or not. The timeline isn't quite up at the time of recording this, so we don't know what's going to happen here. But, ShinyHunters, they're a big game hunting crew. If you're not familiar, they're just a ragtag bunch of folks who go after support teams, business logic flaws to get in the back way, like resetting passwords, getting in admin accounts, and then pivoting into mostly business to consumer companies so that they can take those credentials and go on to either exploit the consumers or steal the consumer's data from the vendor, right? So they've hit some very big names. They are a big game hunting crew, so they've been around for a while. We'll see more, I'm sure.
Finally, an attack that weaponizes your own muscle memory into a remote shell. A demo site called copy.fail is making the rounds, showing off a new pastejacking attack. Basically, a page serves up what looks like an innocent command to copy, but invisible characters and hidden new lines mean what actually lands in your terminal includes lines that you never saw, and then on paste, they run. It's clipboard Trojan horse, and the target is exactly the overtired engineer trying to Google fixes at 3 a.m. Mike, what's the practical hygiene for admins who copy-paste from the internet 100 times or more a day? Asking for a friend.
Copy fail. Hoo boy. Buckle in. This one's interesting. Copy fail is a Linux privilege escalation bug, and that might sound very boring and something you might need another attack for, but this one is a little bit unique in that it's in almost every single Linux distro since like 2017. Things it affects: Linux, anything running Linux. There are some scenarios where the memory management is done in certain ways, right? Like some versions of Kubernetes that are managed, not necessarily effective against this. But if you are running Linux, which is most of the internet and most web apps and most SaaS services, somewhere underneath there is a Linux kernel. This privilege escalation is a problem, and the POC code was dropped in a blog post with everything in it, no disclosure, nothing's patched yet. So patches will be out, I'm sure, ASAP, but effectively almost all Linux distros use the same library on the back end, and they found a bug in that one library, and so it's a very easy, like, couple line Python script to trigger this thing. It's going to be a problem. And if you're saying to yourself, like, why is a Linux privilege problem in 2026? Well, think about how many apps you run in Linux containers, or even the containers abstracted, right? Let's say you're running AWS Lambdas or Cloud Runs or in a Kubernetes cluster. There's Linux somewhere. Somewhere has root. And if you can get a root privesc in, let's say, a web app, you're all the way down into the hypervisor. So this one's very bad. It will be a long one. This one's going to be around for a while. Take a look at all your stuff. Make sure, your service providers are patching, your SaaS providers are patching. Everybody's going to be patching, basically.
So, to recap, an RMM auth bypass and a Windows flaw walked into a KEV catalog, an AI proxy became a credentials buffet, a partner breach became a Vimeo breach, and your clipboard learned to lie? Your perimeter this week is whatever your tools, your vendors, and your habits stop checking themselves. So as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and questions in the comments. We'll be back next week with more updates. Until then, stay safe out there.